I stared at my phone screen, my face circled in red like a target, while my daughter-in-law asked her followers who they'd erase from our family. The comments poured in like poison, each laugh, each cruel agreement feeling like a slap across my 68-year-old face. So I typed back the words that would change everything. The house you're living in isn't your husband's, it's mine, and I just voted to erase you from my property. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let me tell you how I got here, sitting in my car outside what everyone thought was my son's house, holding the deed that proved otherwise. It started with what should have been a family celebration. David, my 42-year-old son, had just gotten a promotion at his accounting firm. Stephanie, his wife of 15 years, decided this called for a family photo to share her triumph on social media. You know how it is these days? Nothing happens unless it's posted for the world to see. "Martha, stand over there," Stephanie directed, pointing to the far edge of our little group. Not Mom Martha like she used to call me years ago, just Martha with that tone she'd developed lately, like I was the hired help instead of the woman who'd raised the man she married. I positioned myself where she wanted, watching as she arranged David and their 2 teenage kids, Emma and Josh, in the center. The perfect nuclear family. I was clearly the add-on, the extra piece that didn't quite fit the aesthetic she was going for. She took dozens of photos, each time finding something wrong. "David, tilt your head more. Emma, smile with your teeth. Josh, put your phone away for 5 seconds." But when she looked at me, she just sighed like my very presence was exhausting. The photo she finally chose was beautiful, I had to admit. David looked distinguished in his new suit. The kids looked like magazine models. And Stephanie glowed with that particular satisfaction that comes from getting everything exactly right. Even I looked decent, standing slightly apart but smiling genuinely at my family. What I didn't know was what she planned to do with that photo. 3 days later, my neighbor Carol knocked on my door, her face flushed with indignation. "Martha, honey, you need to see this." She thrust her phone at me, and there it was. Our family photo, but now my face was circled in thick red marker. The caption read, "Family game. If you could erase one person from this picture, who would you choose? I think you know my choice." The family, drama, and honest moments. My heart stopped. I scrolled through the comments, each one a fresh wound. Definitely the old lady. Why is she even in the photo? Time for the nursing home. Your family would be perfect without the extra baggage. Stephanie had responded to each comment with laughing emojis and heart reactions. She was enjoying this. My humiliation was entertainment for her and her followers. The memory of buying that house 12 years ago came flooding back as I sat staring at Stephanie's cruel post. David had just married Stephanie, and they were living in a cramped apartment, drowning in student loans and credit card debt. My husband Frank was still alive then, and we'd just received a substantial inheritance from his mother's estate. "Mom, we're looking at houses," David had confided during one of our Sunday dinners. "But the market is insane. We can't qualify for anything decent on our salaries." I watched Stephanie that night. How she avoided eye contact when money came up. How she suddenly became very interested in her phone whenever David mentioned their financial struggles. But I also saw how much my son loved her. How his face lit up when she laughed. How protective he became when anyone criticized her. Frank and I talked about it for weeks. "We could help them with a down payment," he suggested one evening as we watched the news. "Or we could do better than that," I replied, an idea forming. "We could buy the house outright, let them live in it, and they could pay us rent until they're in a better position to take over the mortgage." Frank studied me carefully. He knew that look, the one I got when I was working through a complex problem. "You're thinking about putting it in your name only, just as a safety net," I explained. "You know how marriages can be unpredictable these days. If something happened, at least David would be protected." It seemed so smart at the time, so generous. When we found the perfect house, a beautiful colonial with 4 bedrooms and a big backyard for the grandchildren we hoped would come, I put it entirely in my name. The deed, the insurance, the property taxes, everything. David and Stephanie were ecstatic. They moved in like newlyweds starting their dream life. And for a while, everything was perfect. They paid us modest rent, just enough to cover the property taxes and maintenance. Frank and I felt good about giving our son such a solid foundation. But Stephanie began introducing me to people as David's mother, who helped us with the house. Then it became David's mother, who gave us money for the house. Over the years, the story evolved until most people believed David had bought the house himself with a small assist from his parents. I never corrected anyone. Why would I? It wasn't about credit or recognition. It was about family. Frank died 5 years ago, and in my grief, I'd been even more generous. I stopped charging rent altogether. Your family, I told David when he tried to insist on paying. This is what family does for each other. Now, sitting in my car, looking at that house with fresh eyes, I realized how thoroughly I'd been erased from the narrative of our family's success. The notification sound on my phone made my stomach lurch. More comments on Stephanie's post. More strangers agreeing that I was the expendable one in our family photo. But mixed in with the cruelty were a few voices of reason, people calling out the post for being cruel and disrespectful. One comment stopped me cold. That's someone's mother. How would you feel if your daughter-in-law posted this about your mom? Stephanie's response was swift and brutal. Some mothers-in-law earn their place in the family. Others just expect it because they gave birth. I believe in earned respect, not automatic entitlement. Earned respect. Automatic entitlement. I thought about the countless Sunday dinners I'd cooked, the babysitting so they could have date nights, the emergency funds I'd provided when David's car broke down, or when Stephanie needed money for her real estate license. I thought about the house, my house, where they'd lived rent-free for 5 years. What exactly did I need to do to earn my place? My phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, my heart lifted. Finally, my son was calling to defend me, to demand his wife take down that horrible post. Mom? His voice was tight, stressed. We need to talk. Yes, we do, I agreed, thinking he meant the post. Stephanie showed me what you commented on her photo. That was completely inappropriate. The world tilted. Inappropriate? David, did you see what she posted? She asked people which family member they'd erase, and she circled my face. It was just a joke, Mom. You know how social media is. But claiming you own our house? That's taking things too far. Just a joke. My public humiliation was just a joke. David, I said slowly, I do own your house. My name is on the deed. I bought it 12 years ago, remember? There was a long pause. That was different. You bought it for us. It's been our home for over a decade. Yes, it's been your home. In my house. Mom, you can't be serious about this. We've put our whole lives into this place. We've renovated the kitchen, redid the bathrooms, landscaped the yard. This is where my kids grew up. With money I saved you by not charging rent, I pointed out. Another pause, longer this time. When David spoke again, his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. What exactly are you threatening to do? The question hung in the air between us. What was I threatening to do? 24 hours ago I wouldn't have known. But 24 hours ago, I hadn't been publicly humiliated by my own family. I'm not threatening anything, David. I'm simply clarifying the facts. Your wife seems confused about who owns what in this family. You're being vindictive. I'm being accurate. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my own small apartment, the one I'd moved to after Frank died, so David's family could spread out in the big house. I'd downsized my life to make theirs bigger, and this was my reward. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I drove to my house and used my key to walk through the front door. Martha? Stephanie's voice came from the kitchen, sharp with surprise and something else. Fear? What are you doing here? I live here, I said simply, looking around at the changes they'd made. New furniture, new paint, new artwork. They'd made it theirs so completely that it felt foreign to me, even though every inch was legally mine. David appeared from the living room, his face flushed. Mom, you can't just walk in here anymore. This is our home. Actually, it's my home. You live in it. Stephanie stepped closer to David, a united front against the crazy old lady who'd clearly lost her mind. This is ridiculous. You haven't lived here in 5 years. But I've owned it for 12 years, I replied, pulling out my phone. Would you like me to show you the deed? It's all very clearly documented. The teenagers, Emma and Josh, had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. They looked confused and uncomfortable, the way kids do when the adult world suddenly becomes unstable. "Grandma Martha?" Emma ventured. "Is everything okay?" Before I could answer, Stephanie turned to the kids. "Go upstairs. The adults need to talk." The dismissal in her voice when she said adults clearly excluded me from that category. I watched my grandchildren retreat upstairs, probably to their rooms to text their friends about the weird drama happening downstairs. "Look," David said, lowering his voice, "I understand you're upset about the social media thing. Stephanie probably went too far, but you can't use the house as some kind of weapon." "I'm not using anything as a weapon. I'm simply asserting my rights as the property owner." Stephanie crossed her arms. "Fine. You want to play legal games? We've been living here for 12 years. We've improved the property significantly. We have tenant rights, and we have sweat equity. You can't just kick us out." I almost smiled at her confidence. "Actually, as my lawyer explained to me this afternoon, since you've never paid rent and there's no formal lease agreement, you're considered guests in my home. I can ask you to leave with 30 days' notice." The color drained from both their faces. "You called a lawyer?" David's voice was barely a whisper. "I called Robert Patterson. He handled your father's estate, so he's familiar with our family's financial arrangements. Very thorough man." Stephanie's mask was slipping now, the sweet social media persona cracking to reveal something much harder underneath. "You bitter old woman. You can't stand that we're happy, that we've built something beautiful here. What you've built," I said quietly, "is a life on my foundation. And apparently, you've built it while mocking the woman who made it possible." David looked between us, clearly torn. "Mom, please, let's all just calm down and figure this out. Stephanie, apologize for the post. Mom, let's talk about making this house thing official somehow." But I was done being the reasonable one, the accommodating mother who always bent to keep the peace. "The house thing is already official, David. It has been for 12 years. What's new is that I'm no longer pretending otherwise." The next morning, Robert Patterson's office felt like a sanctuary. At 73, he'd been practicing law longer than some people had been alive, and his quiet confidence was exactly what I needed. "Martha," he said, reviewing the files spread across his mahogany desk, "you're in an interesting position. Legally, you're absolutely within your rights. Practically, this is going to get messy." "How messy?" He leaned back in his leather chair, studying me over his glasses. "Your son and daughter-in-law have lived in that house for 12 years. They've made improvements, established residency, built their lives there. While they don't have legal ownership, they do have what we call equitable interests." "Meaning?" "Meaning they can't claim ownership, but they can argue they deserve compensation for improvements, or time to relocate, or a right of first refusal if you decide to sell." I thought about the renovated kitchen, the finished basement, the deck David had built himself 2 summers ago. "And what do I owe them for improvements to my property?" Robert smiled, the first time I'd seen him do that since I'd arrived. "That's where it gets interesting. Since they made those improvements without your written consent, and since they haven't been paying rent or property taxes, they have very little legal standing to demand compensation. So I could ask them to leave? With proper notice, yes. But Martha, I have to ask, is this really what you want? This will likely destroy your relationship with your son." I thought about Stephanie's post, about the comments calling me extra baggage, about my son accusing me of being vindictive for stating facts. "Maybe that relationship is already destroyed," I said quietly. Robert pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Tell me what you want to accomplish here." For the next hour, we discussed options. I could evict them. I could sell the house and force them to relocate. I could establish a formal lease agreement with market rate rent. Or I could transfer ownership to David, with or without compensation. "There's one more thing," Robert said as our meeting wound down. "I've been reviewing your late husband's estate records for another matter, and I noticed something interesting. When Frank inherited from his mother 12 years ago, there was more than just cash." He pulled out another file, thicker than the first. "There's a trust fund that was established for your son, with you as the administrator. It's been growing with compound interest for 12 years. My breath caught. "How much?" "As of last month's statement, just over $400,000. I stared at the number on the page. David had a trust fund, a substantial trust fund that I'd been managing without really paying attention to it, authorizing the bank to reinvest the dividends and interest automatically. Frank never told David about this? The trust documents indicate it was meant to be revealed when David turned 45, or in the event of your death, whichever came first. David turns 43 next month. A plan began forming in my mind. Not revenge exactly, but something more sophisticated. Something that would teach some valuable lessons about assumptions and entitlement. Robert, I said slowly, I think I know exactly what I want to do. 3 days later, I was ready. I'd had time to think, to plan, and to discover just how deep Stephanie's manipulations ran. It started when I decided to review my financial records more carefully. Frank had always handled most of our investments, and after he died, I'd been content to let them grow on autopilot. But Robert's revelation about David's trust fund had made me curious about what else I might have overlooked. What I found in my bank statements made my blood run cold. For the past 2 years, someone had been making small, regular charges to my credit card. Nothing huge, nothing that would trigger fraud alerts. $50 here, $30 there. A subscription service, a few online purchases, some app downloads. The charges came from different merchants, but they all traced back to one source, Stephanie's phone. She'd been using my credit card number for her personal expenses. Carol, my neighbor, helped me piece together the timeline. I always wondered how Stephanie could afford those expensive handbags, she admitted as we sat in my kitchen, surrounded by bank statements. David's a good accountant, but those purses cost more than my car payment. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Stephanie had been presenting herself on social media as a successful real estate agent, but according to her license lookup, she'd only closed 3 deals in the past 2 years. Her income was practically nothing, yet she was posting photos of spa days, shopping trips, expensive dinners, all funded, I now realized, by my credit card. I calculated the total, over $8,000 in unauthorized charges, small enough to fly under the radar, large enough to fund the lifestyle she was flaunting online. The same online presence where she'd humiliated me for the entertainment of strangers. My phone rang just as I was photographing the evidence. Stephanie's name flashed on the screen. Martha, we need to talk. Her voice was different now, less confident than it had been a few days ago. Yes, we do, I agreed. David and I have been discussing the house situation, and we want to make this right. We're prepared to offer you fair market rent, starting immediately. How generous of you, I said, looking at the credit card statement spread across my table. And how exactly do you plan to pay this rent? There was a pause. What do you mean? I mean, according to the Real Estate Commission database, you've sold 3 houses in 2 years. That's perhaps $15,000 in commissions before taxes. David makes $60,000 at the firm. So on $90,000 a year gross income, how exactly have you been funding your lifestyle? Another pause. Longer this time. When Stephanie spoke again, her voice was tight. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. For instance, the fact that my credit card has been charged $8,000 in the past 2 years for purchases I didn't make. The silence stretched so long, I thought she'd hung up. Stephanie, are you there? Those charges, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I can explain those. I'm sure you can. Just like you could explain why it was appropriate to publicly humiliate the woman whose credit card you've been stealing from. I never meant to. You never meant to get caught, I interrupted. There's a difference. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The rush of taking control. Tomorrow, I would implement the plan Robert and I had developed. Tonight, I would sleep better than I had since Frank died. The game was changing. And for the first time in a long time, I was the one making the rules. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Emma, my 17-year-old granddaughter, showed up at my apartment with red-rimmed eyes and a determination that reminded me of myself at her age. Grandma Martha, I need to tell you something, she said, settling into my kitchen chair with the gravity of someone twice her age. I poured her coffee, noting how she'd grown up so much in the past few years while I'd been busy being the accommodating grandmother. What's on your mind, sweetheart? Mom's been lying about a lot of things. Emma's voice shook slightly. I heard her on the phone last night, talking to her sister about the credit card thing. She wasn't sorry, Grandma. She was angry that you found out. My heart ached for this girl. caught between her mother's selfishness and her own sense of right and wrong. "What else did you hear?" Emma pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. "She's been planning this for months. Look." She showed me a series of text messages between Stephanie and her sister Karen. Messages about finally getting the old lady out of the picture and claiming what's rightfully ours. Messages about how David was too soft and needed to grow a backbone when it came to his mother. The most damning message was from 3 weeks ago. "Posted the perfect thing today. Time to show Martha exactly where she stands in this family. David will thank me later when he sees how much happier we are without her constant interference." The social media post hadn't been a spontaneous joke. It had been a calculated attack designed to humiliate me into backing down. "There's more," Emma continued, scrolling through the screenshots she'd taken. "She's been telling people that you've been secretly charging us rent this whole time and that you're trying to kick us out because you need the money. She's making you sound desperate and greedy." I studied my granddaughter's face, seeing Frank's honesty and David's gentle nature, but also something stronger, something that wouldn't be bullied or manipulated. "Emma, I want you to understand that whatever happens between your mother and me, it doesn't change how I feel about you and Josh." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know, Grandma, but I also know what's right and what's wrong. And what Mom did to you was wrong." That afternoon, Robert called with news that changed everything. "Martha, we have a problem. David filed papers this morning claiming adverse possession of the property." "What does that mean?" "It means he's arguing that since they've lived there openly for 12 years, maintained the property, and you've allowed them to live there without formal rent agreements, they have legal claim to ownership through continuous occupation." I felt the ground shift beneath me. Can they do that? They can try. It's a long shot. But in some states, if someone occupies a property openly for a certain number of years, while the owner takes no action to stop them, they can claim ownership. The good news is that in our state, the requirement is 20 years, not 12. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by anger. David was actually trying to steal my house through legal manipulation. "But there's something else," Robert continued. "They've hired Margaret Stevens as their attorney. She's expensive, Martha, very expensive. On David's salary, there's no way they can afford her. Then how are they paying her? That's what we need to find out. Because if they're using credit obtained through fraud, we have them dead to rights." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment, looking around at the modest space I'd chosen so my son's family could live comfortably in my house. The house they were now trying to steal from me. Well, two could play at legal games. The confrontation came sooner than expected. David appeared at my door the next evening, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. "Mom, we need to end this madness," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. "I agree completely," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. "The madness of your wife stealing my credit card, the madness of you trying to claim my house through adverse possession, the madness of publicly humiliating the woman who gave you everything." David flinched at each accusation. "It doesn't have to be like this. We can work something out." "You mean the way we worked out you living rent-free in my house for 5 years? That was different. You offered. And you've repaid my generosity by letting your wife commit credit card fraud and trying to steal my property through legal manipulation." David slumped into my armchair, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. "She said it was the only way to protect our family, that you were getting unstable, that you might try to take the house away for no reason. So the solution was to humiliate me publicly, and then actually try to take my house away? When you put it like that, it sounds crazy." "It is crazy, David. Your wife has manipulated you into thinking I'm the problem when she's been stealing from me for 2 years. For a moment, I saw doubt flicker across his face. Then his phone buzzed, and I watched him read a text. His expression hardened again. "Stephanie says you've been spreading lies about her to Emma, trying to turn our kids against their mother. I haven't said a word to Emma about any of this, but apparently she has eyes and ears of her own." David stood up abruptly. "Look, Mom, here's the deal. We're willing to pay you $2,000 a month in rent, starting immediately. That's fair market value. In return, you drop all this nonsense about credit card fraud. And if I don't accept your generous offer, then we'll see you in court. Stephanie's attorney thinks we have a good case for adverse possession, and she's prepared to argue that your recent behavior shows you're not competent to manage property ownership. The threat hung in the air between us. They were going to try to have me declared mentally incompetent. David, I said quietly, do you remember when you were 8 years old and you broke Mrs. Henderson's window with a baseball? He looked confused by the change of subject. Yeah? You came home crying, terrified of getting in trouble. Do you remember what I told you? You said that breaking the window was an accident, but lying about it would be a choice. And what did we do? We went over together, and I apologized and offered to pay for the window with my allowance money. I nodded. You learned that day that taking responsibility for your mistakes is what makes you a good person. What you're doing now, David, isn't an accident. It's a choice. When he left, I sat in the silence, thinking about the little boy who'd understood right from wrong and wondering when he'd lost that clarity. The discovery came from an unexpected source. Josh, my 15-year-old grandson, called me while his parents were at their lawyer's office. Grandma, I found something in Mom's office. Can you come pick me up? 20 minutes later, I was parked outside the house I still legally owned, watching my grandson hurry down the driveway with a manila folder clutched in his hands. What is it? I asked as he climbed into my car. Mom's been keeping records of everything, he said, opening the folder to reveal meticulously organized documents, bank statements, credit card applications, even printouts of your social media accounts. I stared at the papers in disbelief. Stephanie had been systematically documenting my life, my finances, my online activity. There were notes in her handwriting, analyzing my spending patterns, my social interactions, even my health information gleaned from public posts about doctor's appointments. Josh, where did you find this? In her desk, in a folder labeled M. Jenkins Strategy. Grandma, there's more. She's been applying for credit cards using your information. My blood ran cold as Josh showed me copies of credit applications, all bearing my name and social security number, but with Stephanie's email address and phone number. How many cards are we talking about? 6 that I found. And look at this. He pulled out a sheet of paper covered in calculations. She's been planning to max them all out and then claim identity theft when the bills come due. The scope of Stephanie's fraud was breathtaking. She hadn't just been stealing small amounts from my existing card. She'd been building an entire identity theft scheme, planning to destroy my credit while enriching herself. There's something else, Josh said quietly. She's been recording your phone calls. He showed me a smartphone app that had been logging and storing audio files. Every conversation I'd had with David over the past 6 months had been recorded and stored in Stephanie's cloud account. She told Dad that if you tried to cause trouble, she'd have evidence that you're losing your memory and saying crazy things. The manipulation was so thorough, so calculated, that I almost admired its audacity. Almost. Josh, I need you to send me copies of everything in this folder. Already done, he said, showing me his phone. I took pictures of every page. Grandma, I'm really sorry about all this. Mom's been different lately. Meaner. Even to me and Emma. I reached over and squeezed his hand. This isn't your fault, sweetheart. And you've been incredibly brave by showing me this. That evening, I called Robert with the new evidence. His reaction was immediate and intense. Martha, this is serious federal crime territory. Identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy. Stephanie could be looking at years in prison. What about David? Did he know? We'll have to determine that. But Martha, there's something else. I ran some financial checks after our last conversation. That expensive attorney they hired, Margaret Stevens, her retainer alone is $50,000. Where did they get $50,000? That's what we need to find out. Because if they used fraudulent credit to pay legal fees for a case designed to steal your property, that's another felony. As I hung up, I realized that Stephanie had made a crucial mistake. In her eagerness to destroy me, she'd documented her own crimes so thoroughly that there was no way to deny them. The bombshell revelation came the next morning in Robert's office, delivered by a forensic accountant named Patricia Wells, who'd been quietly investigating David and Stephanie's finances. Mrs. Jenkins, Patricia said, spreading documents across the conference table. Your son and daughter-in-law have been busier than we initially thought. She pulled out a thick folder. 6 months ago, they opened a business called Jenkins Property Management, LLC. On paper, it looks like a legitimate property management company. In reality, it's been used to funnel money from multiple sources. What kind of sources? Fraudulent loans, for starters. They've been using your property as collateral for business loans without your knowledge or consent. The house you own free and clear? They've borrowed against it 3 times in the past year. My head spun. How is that possible? Robert leaned forward. Because David had access to the property deed through the family documents your late husband kept. He's been forging your signature on loan applications, Patricia continued. They've borrowed a total of $230,000 against your house. The money has been funneled through the LLC to pay for Stephanie's lawyer, fund their lifestyle, and, most interestingly, to purchase another property. Another property? A vacation condo in Florida. Purchased 8 months ago for $180,000. Cash. I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. While I'd been living modestly in my small apartment, they'd been using my house as a personal ATM to fund a secret vacation home. There's more, Patricia said. The trust fund you mentioned, the one your husband established for David. Someone has been making unauthorized withdrawals from that account as well. Robert pulled out another set of documents. $40,000 over the past year, all withdrawn by someone with David's power of attorney information. But I never gave David power of attorney over that trust. No, Robert said grimly. But you did give him power of attorney for your medical decisions when you had surgery last year. Someone has been using that limited authority to access financial accounts. The room fell silent as the full scope of the betrayal sank in. My son, the boy I'd raised to understand right from wrong, had been systematically defrauding me for over a year. What are my options? I asked finally. Robert and Patricia exchanged glances. We can file criminal charges immediately, Robert said. Bank fraud, identity theft, forgery, elder abuse. The evidence is overwhelming. Or, I sensed there was another option. Or we can present them with the evidence and see if they're willing to make full restitution and cooperate in unwinding all these fraudulent transactions. I thought about David's face when he'd threatened to have me declared incompetent. I thought about Stephanie's cruel post, about her systematic documentation of my life for the purpose of destroying my credibility. How long would they go to prison? Patricia answered. David could get 5 to 7 years. Stephanie, given the extent of her planning and the fact that she initiated most of these schemes, could get 10 to 15. I closed my eyes, thinking about Emma and Josh, about what it would mean for them to have both parents in federal prison. But I also thought about what it meant that my own son had stolen from me while planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. I want to see them, I said finally. Both of them, here in this office, tomorrow morning. Martha, Robert warned, once we reveal what we know, there's no going back. I opened my eyes and looked at him steadily. There's already no going back, Robert. That decision was made the moment they chose to steal from me. They walked into Robert's office the next morning, like they were attending a business meeting. David in his best suit, Stephanie in a designer dress I now knew I'd probably paid for without realizing it. I hope this means you've come to your senses about the house situation, Stephanie said, settling into her chair with practiced confidence. Oh, I've definitely come to my senses, I replied, watching as Robert placed the first set of documents on the table. David's face went white as he recognized the bank loan applications bearing his forged signature. Stephanie's composure lasted about 10 seconds longer until she saw the credit card applications with my stolen information. This is all a misunderstanding, David said weakly. Is it? I asked. Please explain to me how you accidentally forged my signature on 3 separate loan applications using my house as collateral. Stephanie found her voice first, shifting into attack mode. You're a sick old woman who's trying to destroy her own family. We've done nothing but love and support you. By stealing $400,000 from me? The number hung in the air like a bomb. Patricia had calculated the total. The fraudulent loans, the stolen trust fund money, the credit card fraud, the vacation condo purchase. That's not what happened, David protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Then tell me what did happen, I said, my own voice surprisingly calm. Tell me how you accidentally opened a business using my property as collateral. Tell me how you accidentally bought a condo in Florida with money borrowed against my house. We needed to protect ourselves, Stephanie burst out. You were getting old, making bad decisions. Someone had to think about the future. So you decided to steal my future to protect yours? Robert cleared his throat. Mrs. Stevens, Mr. Jenkins, you need to understand the gravity of this situation. We have evidence of bank fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and conspiracy. These are federal crimes with serious prison sentences. David's composure finally cracked completely. Mom, please. I never meant for it to go this far. Stephanie said it was just temporary, that we'd pay everything back once the business got going. What business? I asked. The fake property management company you created to launder stolen money? It's not fake. We were going to make it real. I studied my son's face, looking for any trace of the honest boy who'd broken Mrs. Henderson's window all those years ago. David, do you remember what I taught you about responsibility? This is different. No, it's not. It's exactly the same. You broke something, and now you have to decide whether to take responsibility or keep lying about it. Stephanie leaned forward aggressively. You self-righteous bitch. You think you're so perfect, but you're just a lonely old woman who can't stand that her son has his own life. The mask was completely off now, revealing the calculating predator underneath. I am a lonely old woman, I agreed. But I'm a lonely old woman who owns property worth $400,000 that you've been stealing from. And I'm a lonely old woman who doesn't have to live with the knowledge that I betrayed my own family. Robert pulled out the final document. Mrs. Jenkins has prepared an offer. Full restitution of all stolen funds, immediate vacation of the house, dissolution of the fraudulent business, and cooperation in unwinding all illegal transactions. In exchange, she won't file criminal charges. And if we refuse? David asked. Then we file charges this afternoon, and you'll likely be arrested by the weekend. David looked at Stephanie, then at me. How long do we have to decide? You have until 5 o'clock today, Robert said. After they left, I sat in Robert's office, feeling strangely empty. Did I do the right thing? You gave them a choice, he replied. The same kind of choice you gave David when he broke that window 35 years ago. At 4:30, my phone rang. David's voice was hollow, defeated. We accept your terms, Mom. We'll sign whatever papers you need. 3 weeks later, I stood in the kitchen of my house, making coffee in a space that felt both familiar and foreign. David and Stephanie had moved out the previous weekend, taking only their personal belongings. The vacation condo had been sold, the fraudulent loans paid off, the trust fund restored. Emma knocked on the door, carrying a box of her things she'd forgotten. How are you doing, Grandma? I'm good. Sweetheart, how are you and Josh adjusting to the apartment? She shrugged. It's smaller, but it's honest. Dad's been different since everything came out. More like his old self, you know? I did know. Sometimes you have to lose everything to remember who you really are. Will you come for dinner Sunday? I asked. Emma smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. Only if you promise to make your famous pot roast. After she left, I walked through the house, seeing it with new eyes. It was mine again, but more than that, it was clean, free from lies, manipulation, and pretense. That evening, I sat on the front porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. My phone buzzed with a notification from social media, a memory from 4 years ago. Frank and me on this same porch celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary. He was smiling at the camera, but I was looking at him, my face full of love and contentment. I shared the photo with a simple caption. Sometimes you have to fight for what matters most. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of justice. Within an hour, it had dozens of likes and comments. Neighbors, old friends, even some strangers offering support and sharing their own stories of family betrayal and recovery. But the comment that mattered most came from Emma. Love you, Grandma. Thank you for teaching us that integrity isn't negotiable. I closed the app and set my phone aside, content to sit in the gathering darkness of my own porch, in my own house, surrounded by the peace that comes from knowing you've stood up for what's right. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of truth, and truth, I'd learned, was the most comfortable thing to live with. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.